To protect, extend rights specifically to African Americans. Okay, LERPs extended for African Americans. Very good. Now, the reason why they needed this is because the states were violating those rights with basically black laws. Remember? Or black codes. Black codes. Remember that? Or slave codes were the earlier ones during slavery. Segregation laws, discrimination laws, and they would manipulate the voting to prevent blacks from voting. By the way, that's what they do from 1877 to 1965. They prevent African Americans from voting in the South. And they had discriminatory laws, segregation laws from this time all the way on. That's like 100 years almost, isn't it? 100 years after the Civil War, the federal government comes down and makes laws that says you can't discriminate. That's all the Martin Luther King protests, the civil rights movement we see in the 1950s and 60s. Why did they? These were not enforced until 1954. We have the Brown versus Board of Education. And then in 64 and 65, we have voting rights and anti-discrimination laws, etc. Okay, because the states were chronically prohibiting or limiting African American rights. That's why today you heard the terms voter suppression, right? Lots of states are trying to, especially in the South, more conservative states, are trying to limit the number of people from voting. And it's basically another, back to this kind of era. The fewer people vote, the better for the Republican Party specifically. More people.
You mean like currently they're trying to?
Yes, currently. Like when you see laws like laws about registering voters in the state. These are state laws. Okay, they try to manipulate it.
Even though the 15th Amendment specifically says the state or other things they
Yeah,
can take away.
In this era, before the 60s, there was no institution to enforce these amendments. There was no civil rights part of the Justice Department or anything. There was no real FBI that was protecting civil rights or investigating civil rights issues. It was the states were pretty much in charge of their own affairs, and that's when we get all the segregation and Jim Crow and.
It's weird because you said that that's happening. Like currently, this amendment, the 15th Amendment, said that the rights can't be denied or abridged by the United States or any state.
Right. So what ends up happening is you have human rights or civil rights groups will bring court cases to fight this and say this law is violating this concept. It has to go through all those court procedures. It's very difficult. And depending on who the president is and what their attitude is, do they prosecute these? Do they follow them through? So can you think that Donald Trump is going to really stand up for civil rights? Does anyone think he's going to say, yeah, more black people need to vote? We're gonna investigate. Do you think he's going to do that? No. It's not his focus. I don't think he really cares about it. Anyway. But those are issues I want you to think about. Okay, any questions about any of this? So that's called radical or congressional reconstruction. Yeah.
So maybe Johnson was since he was a white supremacist, enforcement.
There's no mechanism to enforce this except under military reconstruction. Now that's a good point. When the military is in the South, they are enforcing the 14th and the 15th Amendment. So you have the first blacks voting. You have the first black representatives. You have the first black governors, etc., going to the state government. Okay? But that only lasts till 1877. And after 1877, it's like they're going pre-war. They remove all of these protections and they put in state laws that prevent people from voting, like literacy tests. They would give a test and they'd say, okay, read this, And I'll show you some tests. There were questions that whites couldn't answer, literate whites couldn't answer, right? Let alone, and they only gave it to blacks to prevent them from voting. So you say, I want to register to vote. Say, okay, take this test. And you go, I don't understand this. Okay, you can't vote. Get out. And then here comes, somebody else. Here, take this test. Or no, Mr. Jones, oh, come on in and sign up. There's no test. Get it? There's also poll tax. If you pay taxes, you had the right to vote. So that means if you're poor, you don't pay the taxes and you can't vote. Get it? So it's a way to limit the voting rolls. And there was one other, grandfather clauses. If your grandfather could vote, then you can vote. Of course, no slave could ever vote.
That one's just really unfair.
They're all unfair.
The other ones are unfair,
But
but that one's just like.
and so the end result will be after 1877, you will have white supremacist governments of these southern states. Okay, specifically. Problematic. Compromise of 1877 is the end of Reconstruction. Can I give you a couple of minutes on that real quick? Here, maybe I got a slide on that. Let's try that. Let's look at the slide. Compromise of 1877 is the end of Reconstruction. It's out of the election of 1876. And now here's the significance. While the federal government is down in the South, what party do you think they're voting for in the southern states? Who's running the government? Who's dominant? Republicans. So, which is traditionally Democrat, right? The South was traditionally Democrat. All of a sudden they're Republican while the military is in the South because they're protecting the black vote, and many Southerners are voting with the Republicans, etc. Well, in 1876 election for president, you got two guys, Rutherford B. Hayes, his nickname, his fraudulency. You ever heard of that? Because fraud, the election is full of fraud. Instead of your excellency or his excellency, he's his fraudulent. Get it?
Oh.
Running against a guy from New York, Democrat named Tilden. There was irregularities in the Electoral College and in the voting. Basically, a whole bunch of areas that are Democrat are suddenly Republican. So there's some voting shenanigans going on. They have a deadlock in the Electoral College. They get a commission. A group, congressmen and senators come together, both parties, and they kind of discuss it. They want to avoid a constitutional crisis. They want to just have a president and have a transition. And so a deal is made. You want to read this instead? You prefer to read this?
No.
Because I'm talking, no one's listening. All right, I'll tell you. They make a deal. The Republicans say, hey, don't contest the election. Let Hayes have the election, and we will remove the troops out of the South. There will be no more Reconstruction. We'll end Reconstruction. You Southerners can just do whatever you want. And the Democrats take it. They take the deal. Hayes is president, and they leave the South. The federal government leaves the South to their own devices. And what ends up happening, you get these governments called the Redeemer. Everyone say Redeemer.
Redeemer.
They have these Redeemer governments where basically white supremacist, Democrat, Southern governments. And they go back to segregation, Jim Crow laws, right? You know those. And disenfranchising black voters. Blacks go back into quasi-slavery status. Problematic. It's not good. You got it? You need help? So that's how Reconstruction ends, with this political deal called the Compromise of 1877. You can remember Hayes wins, the Republican wins, but there was fraud in the election, and they make a deal to end Reconstruction. Basically, nobody from 1877 to 1965, you could say 54 is when Brown versus Board is done. The federal government is not paying attention to any civil rights. Civil rights issues for blacks specifically are dead. There's no development. We'll see this. All these presidents, look, slavery ends here, and all of these presidents, nobody stands for civil rights until he does and he does. He tries. He's the leader right there. His name is LBJ. Lyndon Baines Johnson is the president who gets civil rights for blacks. He is the president who gets it done. And then the rest of these are, you still have the ups and downs, but you do have more progress. Okay? Cool? You got it so far? Are you with us?
Mm-hmm.
Hello? Anybody here?
Hey.
How about an essay? Like your attitude, Mr. President.
Yeah, let's read it.
Madam President.
Re-elected.
Oh, wait a minute. No, that's not going to happen.
We're changing.
Oh.
Tomorrow we have to
People
re-elect.
have spoken, Naveen. I'm sorry. They don't want a woman president. Yes?
Eisenhower was
They don't want crooked Hillary.
pretty important for civil rights too.
No.
No.
He fulfills his responsibility, but he doesn't stand up for it. He doesn't go, we want civil rights. He does it marginally. He really stands up. After World War II, he said, we need to treat our all of our citizens better. And it's disgraceful, basically. He stands up, and he almost loses the next election because of it. All right, here's the essay question. The strategies and goals of Reconstruction for Lincoln, Johnson, and congressional Republicans. So what do you got to know to write this essay?
Goals and strategies.
You got to know what their plans were and how they were going to get it done for Reconstruction. It's real easy if you know their plans.
Do you have to know the responses to their plans or just what their plans?
A good essay would include, a full discussion. So in the body paragraph, you only have to do 2 of these. So you would do one paragraph on presidential Reconstruction, talk about Lincoln and Johnson, and then you do 2 paragraphs on congressional. You could talk about their hostility towards Johnson, talk about the impeachment, talk about the military, talk about 13, 14, 15th Amendments. That's all details you would use in this. Hey, it's a dumb question,
Yes.
but I'm going to ask anyway. Have you ever seen anything about how newly freed blacks or former slaves felt the day of emancipation and what they were thinking? I have some really neat documents. Here's one. This guy you got to know. His name is Booker T. Washington. He is the second African American leader that you have to know. So we got Frederick Douglass was first. He's around in still by the 1870s, but after about 1870s, it's Booker T. Washington as the spokesperson for African Americans. He runs a school. You really got to know him, so pay attention to Tuskegee Institute. You guys heard of that?
Yeah.
It's a black school in Alabama. It's a black university. It was started in this era. He starts it and his goal for African Americans is in this era.
I think it's still there.
Yeah, it's still there. His goal for African Americans is, let me show you, improvement Here he is. Okay. His goal for African Americans, and he's the leader all the way till about 1915. He's one of the main spokespersons. His thought will be the Atlantic Compromise is the name of it. Definitely really important. Basically says his message to African Americans is do not fight over civil rights. Do not try to get the vote. Do not agitate on those civil rights questions because we won't win and it's futile. It's not the right time. We need to improve our economic status first. Okay, you follow that? You follow me? That's what the Atlantic Compromise is. Let's not worry about civil rights. Let's focus on education. Let's focus on economic status. And then we'll worry about civil rights later. It's a big message. Whites love that message, especially Southerners. You know why?
Doesn't have to deal with them.
Because then they go, okay, you stay over there. Don't worry about getting political power or rights. Get it? He was criticized. It's very controversial in the black community to say, oh, you don't care about rights and you're kind of they would call him Uncle Tom, someone who is cooperative with the whites. Okay, you don't stand up for your people. It's from Uncle Tom's Cabin, yeah. It's a slur, it's an epithet. His book is called Up from Slavery. He wrote an autobiography just like Frederick Douglass. Tuskegee Institute is what he creates. It starts as a technical school and a teacher's college to educate black students to be teachers. It's still around today. It's one of the nation's best African American colleges. This Plessy versus Ferguson. This is about the 14th Amendment. Equal treatment under the law. And in this case, Plessy sues Ferguson over equal treatment. He's riding on a train, and basically the train, he has to sit in a segregated car at the back, which is terrible, deteriorated, broken windows, things like that. So he sues him in court and says, hey, wait a minute, this is not equal treatment. I'm being discriminated against. Supreme Court says, this is 1796. Supreme Court says, oh no, that's wrong. You cannot be treated differently, but you can be segregated. And this is the quote. It says, you can be segregated, you can be separate, but equal treatment. And so it says, yeah, it's legal to separate the races as long as the facilities are equal. Well, they were never equal, okay? But here's the thing. Nobody else is, that's the law of the land until 1954. Okay, until Brown versus Board, right? Saying it was never equal. So he's stuck in that context. So he says, let's not fight about rights. Let's worry about education. Let's worry about economic status. Controversial. Jim Crow, he's in so that supports segregation. And then these are tons of lynching. We'll come back to that. Okay. So do you know Booker T. Washington is?
Yeah.
Okay, you want to hear what his Liberation Day was like? It's kind of poignant. I really, sometimes I can't read it. It's so emotional. Someone want to read it for me? No. Fiona, how are you doing today? I'll have you read it today. Is that okay? Okay, go ahead.
Freedom was in the air and had been for months. Deserting soldiers returning to their homes were being seen every day. The night before the eventful day, word was sent to the slave quarters to the effect that something unusual was going to take place at the big house the next morning. There was little, if any, sleep that night. All was excitement and expectancy. Early the next morning, word was sent to all the slaves, old and young, to gather at the house. In company with my mother, brother, and sister, and a large number of other slaves, I went to the master's house.
Okay, just imagine, he's a little kid at the end of slavery, right?
The most distinct thing that I will now recall in connection with the scene was that some man who seemed to be a stranger, a United States officer, I presume, made a little speech and then read a rather long paper, the Emancipation Proclamation, I think. After the reading, we were told that we were all free and could go when and where we pleased. My mother, who was standing by my side, leaned over and kissed her children while tears of joy ran down her cheeks. She explained to us what it all meant, but that this was the day for which she had been so long praying, but feared that she would never live to see.
Isn't that incredible? I don't know, it's kind of emotional for me to read that. Living your life in slavery, and then all of a sudden now you're free. They can't do this to you anymore. You can go where you want. You're liberated. Some of the documents I have, I really want to I'll get them out today, and maybe we'll share them tomorrow. Just very uplifting and very positive. How if you can put yourself in those positions of what it was like for them to finally have this freedom, which they wanted and were hoping for, and etc. I think it's a very, very poignant, very interesting kind of story. So that was Booker T. Washington's. Do you know Booker T. Washington now? Do you know? So you got to know him for sure. Okay. Atlanta Compromise, Tuskegee Institute, spokesman for African Americans, economic advancement, not civil rights. Okay. Big deal. Reconstruction, if we haven't defined it for you, is the process used to bring the South into political union. So it's how do we get the South fully functioning members of the Union again. So when they send representatives, when they have state governments, all of those things. That's what Reconstruction is, okay? Reconstructing the political union, right? We have the plans. Let's look at, here's some questions that all of the plans answer, and this is a good way to organize it, I think. What would Lincoln say to this? How will the rebellious states participate in government? When will they be able to come back into the Union? What will happen to the black population? What happens to the Confederate leaders? Lincoln's plan is lenient, right? So, how will they? As fast as possible. Very fast. What terms? They have to take an oath. 10%. When 10% of the eligible voters take an oath, they're back in the Union. And they can send representatives and they can have governments again. What happens to the black population? According to Lincoln, nothing. Lincoln, this is one problem with Lincoln. He makes no accommodation or no, plans for former slaves. The Freedmen's Bureau was all he had, and it was only for this long. It was very short term. He said, no, we're not, I'm not dealing with that. We're not dealing with social relations, cultural and political issues with blacks. He says, I'm not dealing with it. We ended the war, that's my focus. We preserved the Union, that's my focus. So, and then he's dead. So there were no plans to get rights or votes for blacks yet. He kind of said, well, maybe for Union veterans of the Union, veterans of the war, black soldiers, they can vote. But other than that, he wasn't advocating black vote. What should happen to Confederate leaders? According to Lincoln, pardon. Pardon them. Once they take the oath, pardon them. So it's a very easy and free and lenient, what do you call it?